Grenoble-Alpes Street Art Fest 2019 vous propose Pochoirs sonores, une série de rencontres avec les artistes présents sur le festival. L'invité du jour, Lee Hill. Eh bien c'est parti, bonjour à tous, nouveau numéro de Pochoirs sonores. Nous sommes aujourd'hui avec Lee Hill dans les locaux de Space Junk de rue Génissieux. Pourquoi ? Tout simplement parce qu'il pleut des hallebardes à l'extérieur et que depuis 1 jour et demi, ça leur est très difficile de pouvoir poser un peu de feutre, un peu de peinture, un peu de tout sur le mur. Mais bon, on va parler de ça, on parlera de plein d'autres choses avec lui. Lee Hill, bonjour, hello.
Bonjour.
Nous avons avec nous Pierre-Louis qui va nous faire la traduction qu'habituellement Victor faisait et que là, le pauvre, il est au fond de son lit parce qu'il a fait une intoxication alimentaire. Pierre-Louis, bonjour.
Bonjour à vous.
Donc, Lee Hill, merci à toi, oui. Alors, dis-moi, tu nous disais que tu étais venu avec Space Junk.
You said you came here earlier in order to work for the cyclotron. Was it a painting experience?
Just for me to see the place, because whenever I do a mural, whenever I do a painting somewhere in the world that I'm not from, I do a lot of research and I try and understand as much as I can in the short period of time, to understand some ideas and dynamics about the location. So I studied about Grenoble, and one of the things that I was very interested in was how much technological innovation is happening in Grenoble. And the cyclotron was ESFR was a place that I found out about, and I'm already very interested in particle acceleration.
You're from Canada, from the English-speaking part?
Ouais, Toronto. I'm a bad Canadian. I don't speak French.
Are you part of a team there, or part of artists collaboration, or are you used to work by yourself on your own?
I almost always work by myself, alone. But I do have a graffiti crews that I'm part of from way back, and I have some friends that I still collaborate with, but mostly it's just solo.
Alors justement,
before arriving there in Grenoble, you were working on other projects there in Toronto?
No, I live in New York. I moved from Toronto to New York 7 years ago. My wife, she was doing her master's, and so I moved with her to New York. But in New York, I was doing many projects before I came here to Grenoble.
Did you kind of did a break with these projects you had in New York, or were you able to finish them before coming?
Yes, I finished all the projects, but I have one big project that's very ongoing, and there's lots of research and a lot of proposals and writing that I'm working on. So it's not like it has to be right this second that I create the work, but so I'm able to come here and it's not a problem.
Are you able to tell us a little bit more about this big project you have in New York, or is it a secret?
No, it's not a secret yet. I'm still explaining some ideas with it, but what I'm doing is one big project in New York that's self-produced. It's just me, and I have a curator, and I have some other people who are donating their time and their effort. But it's going to be installation, murals, and one art show all around New York with the same sort of theme and idea that ties everything around. And the main theme of the whole show is addressing climate change, because that right now I see as the most pressing issue that humanity is facing. And I also see it as probably the most epic story that humanity is facing. And because I see it as this epic struggle, The way I think a lot of early humans dealt with really big problems was to create a mythology. And this story ends up being a way for people to deal with very big issues. And I'm using this same tool as a mechanism to deal with climate change. So I'm creating my own mythology around climate change to personify the different dynamics. So I spent many months just researching the data, listening to scientists speak about the issue to try and understand all the different concepts, because it's not just the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and that is the major component, but climate change itself just means humanity changing our environment to an effect that it's completely decimating in the near future humanity's potential. And the last thing is the main portion of the work is made with installation, and the installations are all using recycled material to try and also move away from the established idea of art and how it needs to be created, and feeding into a cycle of waste and production.
Donc, l'idée de Donald Trump est de nous dire que c'est un complot.
What do you think about Donald Trump saying that climate change is a fake news?
I mean, are we really going to talk about Donald Trump? Everyone in the world knows he's the biggest idiot and everything that comes out of his mouth is a lie. I had a very interesting thing when I was very young. Me and my friends, we used to go climbing in this one area, and there was this one man who was a little crazy, and he used to come every day and he would tell us this story, which was this human that was made out of different materials, and it was actually the history of humanity. And he said that we're right now in the last stage of humanity, and first we're going to have a black president, and then we're going to have the Antichrist. And I always thought it was so crazy because this was before Obama even came in, and I remember when it happened I was like, oh my god. But I think the concept of an Antichrist is just somebody who is pure ego, somebody who only cares about themselves, cares nothing about anybody else, and he's a perfect personification of the ego. It doesn't matter about anyone around him. It just matters about his opinion, his ideas, and his attention. And this is one thing that I find very difficult in confronting somebody like that, is that he demands so much attention, and we're all giving it to him.
Donc tu dois soutenir peut-être Sea Shepherd.
The Sea Shepherd. Yes, of course. I think they're incredible. It's like an anarchist attitude towards saving the world, and I think this is actually, it's sad to say, but one of the ways that it needs to happen is a little bit through violent action, where you make sure that these things are enforced, because I mean, laws are put in place to try and keep humanity in check, but so many of us are really good at pushing those boundaries to a point that everything just falls apart. And I really like someone like that just takes a stand and fights for something that he believes in. I think that's really important to have people like that in the world, especially when the thing they're fighting for is good. Obviously, there's a lot of people who fight for things that aren't so good, but...
So, after this politic introduction, talk about art.
You don't normally get the political questions this early.
Eh ben, quand même, passons à l'art. J'ai vu malgré tout que la plupart de tes travaux muraux sont des effets d'optique.
I'm obsessed with this concept of solidifying a moment, because I feel in our world right now we have so many technologies that are speeding up the way we process information and the way things are moving between people, between ideas, between goods. We've, especially because of the internet, we've put everything in an extremely fast pace. And I like this idea of trying to represent that pace, but stopping it mid-motion so that you can try and comprehend and address the different issues that are happening inside of that. And in the early 20th century, there was an interesting saying that they used to say, at the start of steam engine technology, a lot of early technologies, they said all these technologies annihilated space and time. And this concept is completely sped up. to a point that this is what's happening now. We're annihilating space and time and changing the pace of these dimensions. And all of this also ties to a very early photographer named Edward Muybridge in America. Edward Muybridge. And he was a early photographer, and he actually invented fast-paced motion photography. There's a very famous photograph of a horse mid-gallop, and it's one where before this moment, everyone always thought that the horse always had one foot on the ground, and he proved that it was faster than your eye could see, but he had all four were off at one moment. And this photograph alone completely revolutionized this connection between cultural production, which is the art, because he was an artist, the scientific lens, because it was a scientific experiment, and the technology of the time. And so what's very interesting also is that the person who was paying for those experiments was Leland Stanford, who later founded Stanford University, and from that came computers and came that side of technology. And at the same time, Edward Muybridge, his motion photography led to the zoetrope, which led then to film. So he's the godfather of film, as well as Leland Stanford being the godfather of many technologies. And all of this is tied together in an amazing book by Rebecca Solnit called The River of Shadows. But all of that was just to say that this book is very good at showing exactly why I'm so interested in motion, and because at this moment in time it completely influenced so much that's happening in the world today. And this also ties to a quote that I really loved in university when I was there by Faulkner, which is, "The aim of the artist is to arrest motion."
After seeing your the piece you're doing, he's considering that the techniques you're using are coming from the Quattrocento, the 4th century. The Italian 4th century. Could you explain if if you were influenced by this? Yeah, he's wondering if drapery you're painting is inspired by the 4th century artists.
Like early Renaissance, yeah. No?
Yes.
Yeah. For sure. I mean, a lot of my style is influenced by classical art as well as Eastern art, because the way I paint is actually very action-based. A lot of it is 1 or 2 strokes with the spray can or with the brush, and it's very precise. So in Asian cultures, a lot of like Chinese calligraphy and Japanese cultures, there's like the 1 stroke. Like calligraphy is a lot like this. So it's an interesting mixture between classical motifs and Eastern influences.
Pourquoi ce style-là et pas un autre? Parce qu'il y a beaucoup de styles qui te sont proposés en peinture.
Why do you focus on those techniques in order to show this movement?
Pourquoi avoir pris ces 2 styles-là en particulier?
I like that question. I've never had to put it in words, but the reason why I would focus on those techniques is because I think a lot of the not impressionist, but these classical paintings, there's something very solid in the way that they would render something. So automatically somebody who's walking by can understand what's happening on the wall. And I still ascribe to the aesthetic of realism. I think when you paint in the public, it's important to have something that the audience can connect to. And I think that's where it's very different from a lot of contemporary art sometimes, is because in the gallery you can deal with the history of art in a different way than when you're on the street, and most of your audience is not, fluid in knowing the history of art. And so I think it's the commons, the general public that's out there can understand that idea of realism, and by mixing in these Eastern aspects, it's to me sort of the start of abstraction. A lot of art history credits the movement of Japanese prints to America in the beginning of Impressionism, and which later led to abstraction. So I think there's an interesting connection between those two. And personally, I'm half Chinese and half Austrian. So half European, half Asian. And I've always been interested in this idea of a hybrid.
Would you consider that you are a world citizen?
Very much. I mean, my grandmother was from the south of China. My grandfather was from the north. They moved to United States at separate moments, and because of the Cultural Revolution, they had to never see their parents again and stay in America. And my grandfather was a very famous scientist. He discovered the X chromosome. And my grandfather was from Vienna, but my family before that was in Poland. And they moved to Egypt because he fought in the war. And my last name used to be Berger, which is German for hill. And then it had to be translated because he fought against the Germans, and if he was captured, he would be tortured. And then my family moved to Canada, and that's where my parents met. But my mother was the first generation born outside of China, and my father was the first generation born outside, but he was born in Britain and then moved to Canada. So I have 3 different citizenship, but my background is actually completely different than my citizenship. And because of this, I feel I also have a very different complexion. Everyone thinks I'm Mexican or Spanish or Cuban or Native American or Italian or French. They think I'm from anywhere but what I really am. And because of this, I've always felt very like from everywhere. I think I've been extremely lucky growing up. It was always a benefit for me to be from all these different places. And I'm also Jewish as well. And I had a bar mitzvah, but I was from a Reconstructionist Judaism, so it's a very different type. And I've always felt kind of special because of it, and no one's made me feel like I should be something. And I think because of that, I was very lucky. I had really good parents, but they both were very, very nurturing, and it became an asset, not something that I had to try and fight against or try and define. I always felt like it was an important part of me.
Were you in a university, or did you take classes of art?
Painting, or are
you a self-made man?
No, I did school. I went to school for art. Like when I was very young, I would draw. I wanted to be a comic book artist when I was very small. And then I got into skateboarding when I was 13. And I used to be sponsored for skateboarding. So it was like, that was my life. Mm-hmm. And then actually I went to a skateboard camp, and that camp, they took me to a Keith Haring exhibit in Toronto, and I learned about graffiti, and they taught me my first tag when I was 13, and I exploded, and I started tagging my whole city like crazy. And I had stopped drawing for those 2 years when I was skateboarding. Like, I just didn't care as much, but graffiti brought me back into art. And eventually I decided that when I was in high school that the only thing I cared about was making art. And this was when, like, you know, certain people were blazing the trail in the street art world before it was even called street art, really. People like Shepard Fairey, and I would see their work and think like, oh my god, like maybe this could be a route for me. And I always liked this idea of the hybrid, the mix of a street but also classical training. And then I decided the only thing I cared enough about in life was art, and I didn't want to spend my life working at something that I didn't care about. So I made a decision that art was going to be my thing, so I decided to go to university. So I did 1 year of school, and it didn't really do very much for me. It taught me a little bit about some techniques. I'd never really studied art before, so I learned all about art history. That was my favorite part, was learning about art history. And everyone around me was from art schools, and everyone had been doing it for so many years. And for me, it was very all new. And then I just decided, fuck this. And I left for 2 years, and I traveled Europe for 1 year. And I went to. I spent the most time between Amsterdam and Brussels because I loved Van Gogh and I loved Egon Schiele, who had an exhibition in a museum there. And then I had family in Brussels, so I'd spend all my money, and then I would go live for free. But what I would do was I would go to all the museums. That's what I spent most of my money on, and I would pick 1 or 2 paintings, and I would draw. And I was very bad when I started. Like, one of my friends, he told me that I'm his favorite artist because when he saw me start, he was like, "You are so shit." But you worked so hard to make yourself good. Yes. And so many of my friends that I know that had so much talent when they were young are not making work anymore.
What are the 2 paintings that really shocked you when you were in these exhibitions?
Do you remember it?
There's an Egon Schiele painting of him. I mean, he painted self-portraits nude all the time, but he did this one where it's hard to explain. It's a very interesting body pose. It's one of the few oil paintings, not few, but it's one of the bigger oil paintings. He has no feet, and his arm is covering his face. His body is very yellow, but it was one of the first times that I'd seen classical artwork, if you can call that classical, but classical artwork where the body was accentuated so much, and it reminded me so much of graffiti and the same type of accentuation and stylistic ideas behind graffiti. And just to finish the story, I traveled Europe and practiced, and then I met a woman who was from Australia, and I moved to Australia to see her, and I met a graffiti crew called AWOL Crew. And this whole year, I was very focused on fine art, and I was doing canvas. The main thing that I would do is I would go out and do plein air painting with a light on my head at night, because I loved painting the way light reflected on water. This was my original style. And I moved to Australia, and I met a graffiti crew, and they got me back into doing graffiti, and I got them into painting canvases. And together we started creating murals that were something to what's happening today, where it's more of a production and there's less, it's more altogether a collaboration. And then I went back to Canada to finish my degree. And this was really good for me because I had learned so much about how to approach the market. And then I had more of a personal style of what I cared about and what I was interested in, very much this fusion between graffiti and fine art. And that's where I learned how to speak about my work, how to contextualize and try different mediums. And I had one teacher who told me one thing, and that's how I learned how to paint.
Alors, est-ce que là, justement, le travail que tu fais en ce moment...
What is the surface of the art you're doing here in Grenoble? It's about 8 meters by 8 by 8.
I have no idea. I don't know meters very well. It's by stories. It's like 5 stories high, which I think is... How many meters is a story? Like 2 meters a story? No, like 4. I don't know. It's big.
Are you used to paint on this kind of surface, or is it smaller or bigger than what you're doing?
I'm used to painting all sizes. so it's not a particularly hard challenge for me, but this one is a little bigger than what I'm used to, but it's perfect size. I love the size.
Does this work already as a title, or are you planning to give it a name when it's done, or when you're back to Canada? Or?
I always name them after I'm finished. Maybe it's like the same day that I'm finished, but usually it's like a week later, because I need to, it's almost like now that it's out of my system, I can see it with clear eyes and really contextualize exactly the title that would encapsulate it. But I have the concept, the theme, everything is there, but the actual name is always difficult. I usually just sit at the computer and I write like a paragraph of just different words that come up and different associations relating to the theme. And after I've written just free consciousness for a while, I stop and I will just look at all the words, and usually there's like 2 or 3 that are near each other, and I'm like, that's the title.
Alors justement,
this art you're doing, how could you tell the people who's going to look at it to understand it? What's the first thing people need to see or have to see in order to understand it? Or do you consider it needs to be seen in its globality? Maybe a little bit when you see a painting, the artist wants the people to see before one detail. That could be upper left, or to look at the center or down right. Or is there like an advice or a clue that you could give to the people who's going to see your art?
The clue would be to listen to this to listen to this radio interview and know the meaning.
Parce que les gens, lorsqu'ils arriveront devant ta façade, peut-être qu'ils auront entendu avant l'interview et ça les aidera à comprendre l'ensemble du travail.
If there was a detail to understand the meaning, it would be the top left and the bottom right, which are 2 opposite ends of technology and time. So at the bottom right will be water, which is the early idea of hydrological energy, because Grenoble is quite famous for that. And the person is a personification of time and humanity manipulating these innovations. And at the top left will be the synchrotron, a particle acceleration. So a new technology that's used to understand the world around us.
Donc, quand je regarde ta façade, il y a 3 personnages. Ces 3 personnages sont un seul et même.
When we see your art, we can see 3 people. Are they the 3 same people as one, or are they different?
Well, that's a very quantum realm question, because technically in every moment, every instant, you're a different person. In time and space. We never occupy the exact same moment. So this is a little bit the concept that I'm playing with, because they technically are the same person, they embody the same thing, but who they are and what they are changes moment to moment, just as we do. From one moment to space to another, you occupy a different reality in space and time. Or not reality, but you occupy a different place in space and time. So technically you are a different person. And I think every moment people reflect different aspects of themselves. And this is one idea, is by representing everything in each moment, you can represent different aspects of a person through time.
Les couleurs que tu as posées sur ce mur, elles sont...
About the colors you used on this art, are they like are you used to symbolic for the idea of movement? Do you like these colors particularly for your paintings, the topic you're dealing with?
I think I personally do associate with these green tones. I think most people don't paint in colors that they don't associate with or find pleasing in some degree. There is a sense of symbolism for the green of her jacket, because I'm trying to also speak about how Grenoble's innovation is quite ecologically focused, and I think this is a very important aspect, again tying to my theme of climate change for my other show. This is like little points that I can manipulate to try and point in a certain direction.
3 last questions. First one, how did you prepare this mural? Did you square the art? Did you project it? Or are you kind of making it unconsciously improvising?
Yeah. So it's none of the 3. Yeah, it's a 4th. It's somewhere between improvising and doing a grid. It's probably closer to doing a grid, but I actually, on my Instagram story, I showed step by step how you do it. But what I do is I have a photo of the wall. Then I make a design that goes on top. When I arrive here, I try and imagine exactly where certain parts of the figure of the piece is situated on the wall. And I try and do brush strokes, really big brush strokes, and action painting, which is very close to the Asian side of the influence. It's very close to calligraphy, to ink painting, but that's the energy and the bones of the artwork, and that's behind. So it has a aesthetic reason, but also that then becomes my grid, because I take a photograph, I go back home, and then I put the image over top, and I make the image transparent on Photoshop. And then every brush stroke I made becomes a spot on the wall that I can reference in real time. And then I sketch based on that.
Considering there was no rain today, how long would you have needed in order to finish this art?
If there was no rain for the whole time I was here, I would be done tomorrow.
3 days?
No.
4? No.
5.
5 days.
It would be tomorrow would be 5 days.
And without rain, it would be in 2
No, tomorrow without rain, I would be done tomorrow. Now I'm going to be done on Friday.
How do you imagine yourself in 10 or 15 years? Do you think you'll still get the power to cross the world and paint in every city?
Ask me that question.
He's asking this question because he interviewed other artists who were like traveling the world for about like 10 or 15 years, and they were just tired of this, and they were not thinking about doing it for the next 5, even 6, 7 years. So what about yourself?
I would like to be doing it for the rest of my life. My thing is that I don't do that many. I keep them a little bit less and a little bit shorter, but there's something that happens when you're painting a wall that size, and when you and the lift, the machine, kind of become one, that there's this magical moment. And some of my happiest moments in life, besides my being with my wife, is when I lose myself in a mural. I mean, I love painting canvases, but there's something about being in the environment and having something so grand where it's almost like your imagination has no limits. You can go so small and you can go so big and have such a big impact. And you don't have to worry about where is this going? Who's buying this painting? Like, obviously, the street art, this is a whole nother radio interview, but street art has a lot of other issues that it has to deal with. It's not like you get to paint and it's totally fine. There's issues of gentrification. There's issues of who in the organization is utilizing it for what purposes. Is it political? Is it not? Every artist who's doing this has many stories about being used for different purposes. So it's not like it's free, but there is a freedom within it, just painting, that's incredible.
Lee, last question. Si tu devais donner un petit conseil ou
last question, what would be your advice to young people who will see your art and who are wondering if they could do the same and if they want to pursue the same career as the one you are doing?
So many different pieces of advice that I learned throughout it, but I think one of the most important things is to practice. like crazy. It takes so much practice, and never get too satisfied in what you're doing. And I think that's the purpose of growing, is when you get too comfortable in something, it's a sign that you're reaching your own ceiling, and you got to make that ceiling higher. And if you really want to get good at something, you just have to keep doing it and doing it. And think about it. Think about why you're doing it. Do you want to do it because you want to make money? Because this is not the place to make money. If you're doing it for fame, maybe, but that's not usually the best reason. But I think if you have a passion that you care about it and you think it's interesting, I would say just practice and try. Yeah. And always step back from the wall. That's the only way you're going to understand what's happening, is you got to step back and see it from afar.
Is there a place where we can see all your art, all your paintings on internet, or you have a website?
Yeah, I have a website, Lihill, li-hill.com. But I'm not just very good at keeping it up to date, so my Instagram is maybe a little bit more accurate.
Lee, on va finir en français. La conversation.
Merci beaucoup.
À bientôt, j'espère, et longue vie à toi.
Merci. Au revoir.
Pierre-Louis, merci pour ton intervention et à très bientôt, j'espère.
À très bientôt, merci pour tout.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Ce numéro de Pochoirs sonore est terminé. Réalisation Bruno Rawinski pour Space Junk Art Centers. À très bientôt pour une nouvelle rencontre.